Hi everyone, welcome to Ayesha's English Oasis. In this video, I'll be talking about the 5 things I like to cover with my students the first few weeks of term 1. I'll then ask you a question after each point to discuss in the comments section below. You may also discuss these questions with colleagues as well. So, here are the things I like to cover with my students in the first few weeks of school. Number 1, class rules for success. I start off by letting all of my students know of my class rules. I discuss the essential class rules for both physical and virtual classrooms. Since I typically elicit the rules from my students, I would prepare posters of class rules and then I would get students to tell me the rules. This is a great way to get them to review modals like must, should, ought to, can, etc. This works for students of all ages, as long as you differentiate your posters or visual materials and the types of questions you'd like them to answer about the posters. The truth is, it doesn't really matter how you convey your class rules. What matters is that you do impart them to your students in an engaging, fun way, and that they also have some sort of say when it comes to the rules that each person has to follow in their class. Student participation is key when it comes to how they conduct themselves and interact with each other in their own classrooms. With that in mind, it's vital to emphasize the importance of respect, engagement, and productivity whilst talking about your class rules. Here's the first question for the comment section. What strategies do you use to encourage student participation in your classroom, especially when it comes to classroom rules and codes of conduct? Share your tips in the comments below. Here's topic number 2, top apps and websites. In the first couple weeks of being back at school, I like to introduce the must-have apps and websites that my students and I will be using to enhance their learning. At this time, I normally limit myself to the top 10 apps and websites so as not to overwhelm my students. The apps and websites are usually those that, 1, are somehow connected to their textbooks. Nowadays, some textbooks have their own apps and websites, in addition to ebooks. The apps and websites are usually those that, 2, are related to exam preparation. Exam boards like Cambridge, for example, have their own very informative websites and a number of apps that students can use to improve all their language learning skills and exam techniques. Number 3, the apps and websites are usually those that provide educational games for language learning students to keep them further engaged in their learning. I also make sure to highlight how these tools can make studying more efficient and enjoyable. Now, don't forget, this is the time to make sure that the apps are downloaded and websites favorited and are being used. So, students are encouraged to whip out their phones in class to use their apps to complete tasks and to play games. Website-based in-class tasks and homework ones are given to encourage students to peruse and use their assigned websites. It's vital that students see right away that whatever list of resources they've been given will be used throughout the year, and that each resource on the list has real value and the potential to improve their language learning. So here's another question for you. Which apps or websites have you found most effective in your teaching? Let's exchange recommendations in the comments. Let's go to the third topic. I'm usually keen on pointing students in the direction of their word or vocabulary lists and grammar lists or references. That way, students can home in on the vocab and grammar they need to know and practice for each term. It gives them a learning focus for the short term and essential reference points for the rest of the academic year. Plus, these lists are fantastic resources from which teachers and students can create a bank of worksheets and games to enhance their teaching and learning experiences. In addition, it's also a good idea to remind students that they need to constantly use the grammar and vocab in their lists in their speaking and writing exercises. In this case, the teacher should instruct the students to, for example, use vocab from units 2 and 3 in their speaking exercise, or to use at least 3 idioms from Unit 4 and the narrative tenses from Unit 5 in their writing. In my experience, it helps to be specific about what parts of the vocab and grammar lists you want students to use throughout the year. Be consistent, and over time, you'll find that your students' retention of both their grammar and vocab will have increased. They'll be consciously using grammar and vocab from across several units, and they themselves will start commenting on the marked improvement in their spoken and written expression. Here's another question for you. How do you incorporate vocab and grammar lists into your teaching? Share your techniques in the comments section below. Let's move on to number 4, assessment. Let students know in the first term, especially in the first couple of weeks, how they'll be assessed, what will be assessed, and even how often they'll be assessed. Let them know your assessment methods, tools, platforms, mark schemes, and so on. At the beginning of term, I tend to give a brief assessment overview, and then as the academic year progresses, I go into more detail whenever necessary. Here are the things I usually tell them about. First of all, I usually tell my students how classwork and homework are assessed, and my marking system. I believe that students should have access to any mark scheme that you're using. This level of transparency makes them aware of the things they need to do in order to progress. Secondly, if I'm planning on making them do any type of presentations to practice their speaking, vocab, or grammar, I give them the assessment details of those as well. Number 3, or furthermore, if they're preparing for any type of national or international exams like the Cambridge Main Suite exams, I talk about how those will be assessed in class or in school. For example, mock exams may be done once a term. This may be a whole school endeavor, or it might be left to the discretion of the teacher. These can be done online using an online platform, especially if students are preparing for a computer-based exam, or they could be done in class using paper if students are preparing for a paper-based exam. In addition, I let my students know how examiners will assess their work by showing them the mark schemes which are used by examiners. Needless to say, these ought to be used throughout the year and as often as possible. Moreover, students should know how often they'll be getting reports and the types of things that will be assessed for reports. For example, will reports be issued every term? Will marks for mock exams be on those reports? Or are the report marks solely based on homework and classwork? Your students have the right to know. It's a good idea to prepare a document or documents summarizing all of the above for your students. This is something that you both can refer to again and again throughout the academic year. Okay, that brings us to our other question for the comment section. What methods do you use to communicate assessment details to your students? Let's discuss them in the comments. We're coming to the end of this video with number 5, building connections. The first few weeks of term 1 is the perfect time to do this. This is the ideal time to A, create a positive atmosphere by exploring icebreaker activities and interactive exercises that will help your students connect and engage right from the start. As you know, as dedicated educators, we know that a successful beginning sets the stage for a fulfilling academic journey. So, let's ensure that every student feels welcome, understood, and motivated to excel. B, this is a great time to fill out forms, especially digital ones like Google Forms. With Google Forms, you can even use voice notes to record question and answer options. This is a great way to keep a record of your students' goals and interests, their learning strengths and weaknesses, their technology access and skills, and the list goes on. C, this is also a wonderful time to play getting to know you games and have discussions with your students that may not strictly pertain to your curriculum and schemes of work. To sum up, use this precious time to make sure that you emphasize the value of getting to know each other for a collaborative environment. Now I'd like to hear from you. This time I've got 3 questions for you to answer. Number 1, have you used Google Forms in your classroom? How did they work for you? Number 2, what are some of your favorite icebreaker activities to start the school year? Number 3, what are your favorite getting to know you games or activities to build connections with your students? Well, that's it, folks. The 5 main things to mention and do at the start of the term. So I like to cover these particular topics. Number 1, class rules. Number 2, my top apps and websites. Number 3, vocab and grammar lists. Number 4, assessment. And number 5, building connections. I hope you found these insights helpful and informative, gearing you up for a successful school year ahead. I'd love to hear from you one last time in the comments below, so here's your last question. What are your top 5 must-cover topics when you begin the first term? Until next time, bye.